Hello everyone, my name is Cameron Searles and I'm an environment designer. And in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the lighting phase of my senior project. So when I first began this phase, I began modeling the lighting fixtures that would be on the ceiling. And they didn't need to be overly complicated like a chandelier, for example. I wanted to have these lighting fixtures to be as sleek, simple, and modern as possible. So I just modeled two different sized cylinder fixtures for standalone lights. But then I also took some inspiration from one of my reference images of having a very unique looking light box. So I decided to recreate that, and then I put them over the two sofas, the locker area, and the pool table. And during this process, I also placed light sources using V-Ray. And I placed these light sources underneath the cylinder fixtures and changed the lighting output to a disc, so the light looks more like a round disc than a square. And as for the light box, I decided to do something a little different and use a light material instead. And the way that I did this was applying inset subdivisions on the object, and then I applied the light material onto specific polygons where the light is going to emit from, and that's the way I was able to pull off that look. And as for the bowling lanes, the lights that I created on the indented ceilings, they weren't enough to light up the whole alley. So what I decided to do was to add these very big ambient lights that were very soft, and I made them invisible to the camera. So that way they were able to light up the darker spots on the bowling lanes to make the lighting look more even. As for the rest of my scene, I applied the same cylinder fixtures in all the rooms. And in the cinema room, I decided to go a little extra and add some side panel ambient lighting that would emit a cyan green color when the room would be dark. But of course, this was only my first lighting setup. I originally planned to have two different lighting setups, one with the warm inviting feel, and the other one having a cool black light neon color vibe. My original plan was also to divide these two different lighting setups into two separate Maya files. However, I realized that for each of these files, I had to go in and apply all the textures, so I didn't want to have to apply the textures twice. So instead, it was a lot easier and simpler to take these lighting setups and divide them into two different groups within the hierarchy that I can toggle on and off. So I began my second lighting setup with the fluorescent black lights. And after looking at some reference images, I noticed that both ends of the fluorescent tube were much darker than the rest. So the way I was able to portray that in my scene was to texture it in Substance Painter, where I make the tube purple, and then I go to each of the ends and gradually make the ends more and more black. And as I imported the lighting texture back into Maya, I noticed there was an obstacle in my way. My plan was to apply this light texture into a light material, but I realized that as I made the light material brighter, it made the texture brighter as well. And I didn't want the texture to be affected by any light multiplier, so my second idea was to turn the light texture into a self-illuminated texture, and then used V-Ray rectangular lights to emit the fluorescent black lights. And even though this showed better results than my first idea, it still had this uncanny valley where the light was shooting downward instead of all around, as fluorescent black lights would be emitting light in all directions. So my third idea was to construct a rectangular box in similar length of a fluorescent light, apply a light material, place it on top of the tube, and then made it invisible to the camera. And this gives off the illusion that the fluorescent tube is emitting light, when in reality there is an invisible box that's emitting the actual light, while the tube is being self-illuminated and is not emitting any light. And this prevents the fluorescent light texture from being affected by any brightness adjustments. Then my next idea was inspired by a reference image that I collected during my pre-production phase. I decided to create a decorative light fixture on both sides of the bowling alley, emitting a rainbow color similar to my reference image. For its design, I decided to model fibers with various different bends and clump together to form a pattern. Then I unwrapped all the fibers and then applied a light material with a rainbow texture onto the mesh. And after doing all of that, it definitely made my bowling alley look more appealing. Now, this part of the lighting phase took place during the texturing phase, and this was when I was creating all the different content on the TV screens for the arcade machines, the TVs, and the screen in the cinema room. And I wanted these screens to emit light, but emit the correct lighting of what's being portrayed on the screen, and not just of a single color. And the way I was able to do this was by creating a rectangular light source, putting it in front of the screen, applying the same texture as what's being portrayed on the screen, and made it invisible to the camera. So again, it's giving off that illusion that the screen is emitting light, when in reality, there's an invisible light doing the work for it. So that pretty much wraps up the lighting phase of this project. I know I skipped ahead to texturing when discussing the screens, but considering we're talking about lighting in this video, I figured we talked about it here rather than the texturing video, which is actually coming up next. So thank you so much for watching. Be sure to check out my other pipeline breakdowns, and I will see you in the next video.